consideration, sir.
Well, thank you all very much, and we appreciate the opportunity to update the commission and the community on where things stand today with the Florida Avenue Road Diet Pilot Study. What we'll do is city staff has put together a presentation just to bring everybody up to speed on why we're here, why we're doing this project, and then Stephen Davis with the Department of Transportation will kick things off from the DOT side to present the hard data and where the project is in process at this point. So, Stephen, if you don't mind, I'd like for you to introduce the DOT team, and then what we can do is then kick things off on the city presentation.
Sure. Hi. Good morning, everybody. Stephen Davis. With me today, I have Mark Mathis, our District Traffic Operations Engineer, Colleen Gerald, who is the Engineer of Record on the traffic study, and Walter Bruggeman, who's shadowing with Traffic Services.
Thank you, Stephen. First, I'd like to, and you'll see this as you look at the two presentations, but we appreciate the DOT's partnership with us as we go through what is admittedly a very important project for the community, not like ones that we've had in the past, like the two-way conversions of the downtown streets, the improvements around Lake Mirror. Lakeland's been very progressive in terms of how it treats its transportation system, and this project is really no different. Kind of stepping back in a very big picture, Florida has a very bad reputation around the nation from a traffic safety standpoint, particularly when it comes to pedestrians. And so as you've seen, most of the top 10 cities in the country, most dangerous cities in the country for pedestrians are in the state of Florida, and Lakeland is on that list. We actually have improved our situation a little bit, to go from 6 on that list to number 9. And Lakeland, Fort Myers, Cape Coral, and Jacksonville, and Orlando got noted in the last update of the Dangerous by Design report that's implemented by Smart Growth America and the National Complete Streets Coalition on our efforts here locally, but there's still a very long way to go to get to our Vision Zero goal that was just adopted with the comprehensive plan. So Florida Avenue has changed a lot over the years. It used to be really kind of the center of the Dixieland community. The photo on the left is from a cake cutting ceremony back in 1952.
5,000-pound cake.
5,000-pound cake. So definitely that in and of itself is worth celebrating. But then you take a look at what Florida Avenue looked like back in 2019, and the whole character completely changed. It became a way to get traffic through the middle of this business district as quickly as possible. And so going back probably, actually at this point, closer to 20 years, the city working with DOT have been trying to figure out what do we do with the corridor. You know, you really only have about 44 feet, 45 feet from curb line to curb line, and really slightly more than 55 feet between building face and building face, which really limits what you can do from an improvement standpoint. And so they've gone back and forth for probably the better part of the early 2000s. About 2012, we started to see the resurgence of discussions of what to do with Florida Avenue and Dixieland. And it really started with the county's complete street policy that was adopted back in 2012 and signed by all of the local governments in Polk County, including Polk County itself. We had a walkability workshop with Dan Burden, who's probably the foremost national expert in terms of walkability, livable community design. He participated in a walkthrough of the corridor, won several evaluations right around that time frame. And that led to, into 2014, a request from the CRA to DOT to, again, explore Florida Avenue in a more detailed fashion to find out what can be done to make it safer for everybody involved. The problem was presented to DOT, and if you remember what it was like a couple of years ago, you had very narrow travel lanes. DOT standard was 12 feet. Now it's down somewhere between 10 and 11 feet, depending on the corridor. But when Florida Avenue was resurfaced in 2008, the actual lane width went down to 8.5 to 9 feet. So it was a very substandard design from that standpoint. You had narrow sidewalks, inadequate transit facilities. Probably the biggest issue that we have from a safety standpoint, and it's pictured here, is that the sidewalks don't meet Americans with Disabilities Act requirements, and in fact, pitch pedestrians, those in wheelchairs, bicyclists out towards the street. And right about the time the CRA made its request to DOT, one of the businesses within, actually located within Dixieland Mini Mall, had approached the city about doing something because they actually had to pick somebody up that had fallen out of their wheelchair into Florida Avenue off the sidewalk. So there was an immediate safety issue that we knew needed to get addressed. And then from a bigger picture standpoint, what role can Florida Avenue play in making our community safer and a more livable city as a whole. Some traffic safety issues within the corridor as well. I mean, you know, the Polk TPO recently adopted its long-range transportation plan back in 2020. It, again, shows Florida Avenue as a top 10 priority corridor for bicyclists and pedestrian safety, that there are certainly issues. And I think in this instance, it's probably more on the bicycle side, but certainly for what we call vulnerable users, Florida Avenue has problems. And these were issues also that were highlighted for really everyone in the 2016 and 2017 master plan conducted by DOT, again, at the request of the city. I always like to use this slide because the buildings don't jump out in front of the cars. So this is indicative of you know, a roadway that does not meet its surroundings. You've got vehicles that's easy for them to come off Florida Avenue into buildings. You know, the picture on the right, actually, a car went through the transit stop that existed in front of Bomar Trophy. And then the photo at the bottom, whilst just outside of the test area, Lakeland Regional Health was installing the bollards around the Oates building because of the concern of vehicles running into the building. When they were installing the bollards, the vehicle hit the building. So, I mean, these are things that are real issues that we wanted to address before a tragedy happened in the corridor. And of course, born and bred, you know, when it had its queue along Florida Avenue, you can kind of see an evolution of how they saw the problem, you know, going from people standing on the sidewalk with nothing to cones. Then you started to see signs asking motorists to slow down, and then you know, having folks come in from the alley. So I mean, it's really been an issue from an economic development standpoint, and certainly in terms of fulfilling the CRA's redevelopment plan, Florida Avenue has been an issue. Some data that we received from the Polk TPO, an analysis they conducted for across the county, shows that for the most part, Central Lakeland's traffic volumes have steadily decreased between 2005 and 2019. That includes Florida Avenue, most of the Beacon Road corridor, most of the downtown system. And so as you start looking at Central Lakeland, volumes have trended downward over the past 15 years. And why is that? Because we've had investments over the past 20 years to address through traffic, regional traffic. You know, the Polk Parkway was completed back in 1999. Anton Bypass was completed 10 years later in 2009. We've had improvements in Kathleen Road. You know, we've had changes to the downtown street system in Lake Mirror Park, and then the opening of Lakeside Village. And one of the things we see with a growing city is the more retail and the more mixed uses you have in other parts of the city, it's not necessary for somebody to come through downtown to get to shopping or to employment. And so, you know, we've seen a bit of that from a land use standpoint. So starting back in 2016, DOT brought in the Central Florida Regional Planning Council, the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council, who has a whole urban design team on staff, as well as other economists and transportation professionals to dig into the corridor in more detail. And actually, this was the first of its kind in the state to look at a transportation corridor from both a transportation and mobility standpoint and an economic development standpoint. And so it kicked off with a day-long planning, what we call a charrette, or a day-long planning workshop over at First United Methodist in May of 2016, where the project team received some initial thoughts from the public of what Florida Avenue could look like, more blue sky thinking, but, you know, kind of more open-ended. What do you want to see in Dixieland and downtown along Florida Avenue? Also during that time, the project team conducted a week-long planning and design workshop within the corridor. So the public for 12 hours each day for 7 days had the opportunity to come in, provide input to the project team. So there was that one-on-one interaction that I don't recall before or certainly since that level on a state roadway, certainly in Central Florida. And there were several presentations to update the public and the stakeholders throughout that process, and it lasted almost a year. It was about 8 or 9 months, but there were different updates to bring the public again, the business owners, property owners, back to the table, show them what they had heard from the public, and to go to the next level. As part of that, all of that work, we really got a glimpse into some potential options on how to enhance Florida Avenue. Whether it's, you know, what are some of the things that we can do in the public realm, whether it's the sidewalks or the streets, to really give folks an interest in coming into Dixieland, into downtown, from either the north or the south. This is an area, at Ariana Street. But also, how can we use our land development code and our comprehensive plan to encourage development that is more mixed use, more urban, more conducive to economic development in Dixieland and downtown. And so they came up with some different options. This is on the Tucker Southside parcel at Belmar in Florida. This location here is on the old Waller Plaza Falcon Square site there at Hillcrest in Florida. But it kind of shows you what the corridor could look like with 2 or 3 story buildings pushed up onto the street, really changing the entire nature and feel of Florida Avenue while also making it a more viable economic corridor long term. And of course, Florida Avenue itself, some renderings of what the street could look like with a 3-lane cross section, should that ultimately be pursued by the city commission and community. So back in May of 2017, the City Commission adopted Resolution 5370 that probably the biggest thing that came out of that resolution was an acknowledgement that Florida Avenue did not adequately serve all users. It didn't get into recommending an improvement package at that time. It was just stating that there was a problem with the corridor and that further analysis was needed to make improvements. And so all the points contained in the resolution are shown here. But it requested a test period of at least 1 year should a road diet be considered as part of an improvement package. And so that's where we are today. Construction began back in April of 2020, was completed in October of 2020. And for those that are wondering, this is not the ultimate section. In fact, DOT had proposed the installation of concrete literally on top of the asphalt as a way to provide a more longer-term interim solution in the event that the 3-lane was selected by the commission and by the community as the ultimate number of lanes. But it avoided the maintenance hassles of having to go in, reinstall orange barrels, quick curb, all those more interim-type solutions that make it more apparent that you're in a construction zone, but also add a significant amount of maintenance costs and actually a lot less certainty of what the corridor could look like longer term. But this is just strictly an interim improvement. We had talked about using landscape or portable planners within the corridor, kind of as a way to give folks a better idea of what the pedestrian realm could look like, with additional greenery, trees, landscaping, those types of things. But with the purchase cost, the material cost, and more importantly, the maintenance cost, that it was cost prohibitive. And so the CRA explored and are implementing other enhancement techniques within the corridor, including murals and facade improvements to further jazz up and enhance Florida Avenue corridor outside of the public realm. And so you can see the evidence of that today as you travel through South Florida Avenue at just under 20 locations. Just some very quick snapshot figures that our folks have been able to pull is that within the Dixieland district during fiscal year 21, we've got about a 93% business tax renewal rate for businesses within the Dixieland CRA. That's slightly less than the 96% citywide. Part of an overarching theme, and we'll discuss more after DOT's presentation, is just what are some of the potential impacts that COVID has had on business activity or transportation and mobility activities, throughout the city and the region. New businesses, actually we've seen an increase or an apparent increase in terms of new business tax licenses pulled within the CRA area between the 2019-20 or 2020-2021 period, almost double. So, there's some mixed messages that we're seeing here, and so I think one of the things that we'll be asking is for additional time to kind of let us recover somewhat, get more back to a normal traffic and business pattern to see where we go from there. But these are just some initial snapshots that we've received at this point. The CRA and Damaris Stoll has also done an amazing job of reaching out to the businesses along the corridor for comment on what they think about the project to this point. And it's really kind of, as you might imagine, It's varied. You've got some businesses that are excited about the potential that the road diet can have long-term for the community. Others that have some concerns about the need but have some ideas about some tweaks to make the test better and make the final improvement better should that move forward. And others that they believe that the going from 5 to 3 lanes has been an obstruction to traffic. So we're hearing, as you might expect, different messages from businesses along the corridor, and we would expect that's going to be the case all the way through final decision, whatever that ultimately is. One of the things that we wanted to really kind of hit on today is that Florida Avenue does not operate in isolation. It's part of a transportation network that's evolving within the city. And so, we've got improvements that, we're working with DOT to expedite along the US 90 Bartow Road corridor from Edgewood up to Main Street. And that was the subject of our workshop with the commission back in February to, ask Secretary Nandum where those individual components are in the production process and how they might be able to be advanced. We've got the South Wabash extension, which Public Works is acquiring right-of-way for now from Ariana down to Hardin. That is part of a long-term 7-mile new north-south corridor that will relieve Florida Avenue and Hardin Boulevard. So we don't want that to get lost in the mix as well. We've got a transit signal prioritization project for Florida Avenue that really at this point appears that we're going to be able to expand it to include 98 North, Lakeland Hills Boulevard, and Bartow Road. That's programmed in 2022 of the DOT work program. So that will help in terms of transit. And then the intermodal center downtown. But ultimately, the funding for this project in Florida Avenue, the timing, the scope, and the limits of it are really going to be subject to the commission decision coming up in 2022, the public input that you hear, and then input from other stakeholders in the corridor. We do have a story map both on through the city's webpage and through DOT's webpage, where folks interested in the project can go learn more detail of the history, actually see a video about why we're making the improvements in this corridor, and just why it's so important to our community. One of the other things that I wanted to highlight is that the master plan and all of our discussions with the department have looked at a larger corridor from Pine Street on the north to Ariana on the south. Because of funding, the test only goes from Lime to Ariana, so we do not want to forget about the area in front of the Polk Theater and downtown Lakeland itself. In fact, this picture was taken on Saturday. We took our son to see Swan Lake, and walking out the Polk Theater, you started to see people walking in the street and everything else, and so it was pretty easy to turn around and snap a picture in real time of something that's happening as we speak in this area that we don't want that to fall through the cracks. So that's the city's portion of today's presentation. And I will turn it over to Stephen Davis to get into the nuts and bolts of the data and analysis for DOT. So I will switch seats with him.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
could we ask a question by the DOT as it relates?
How would you like to do that?
I'd be happy to answer questions.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
Prior to us, the study starting, Mr. Barber, we were sharing with the commission at the time how the Dixieland Neighborhood Association was aggressively coming to us, sharing with us that we need to do something about the situation. And there were some statistics that were given at the time. I didn't keep them, it's not in my memory. I don't have them on paper. But there were some numbers, of course. Do you recall, maybe you or even Ms. Teresa may have that kind of information? Because I know the Neighborhood Association was sharing with us, because of a certain number of accidents, we're seeing, had examples of where vehicles' side mirrors or trucks were being taken off of their particular vehicle as it was. Those kind of things were being shared with us, and the Neighborhood Association at the time, of course, Ms. Mary, who passed away since that time, of course, was the neighborhood leader or the president of that particular organization. Do you have that kind of stuff that you can just help us refresh our mind?
Absolutely. In fact, Stephen will be able to get into the crash data for the previous 5 years leading up to the test period.
Okay.
But we did hear, in fact, the Citrus Connection. They were expected to be here today, but this corridor was one in which they were seeing most losses in terms of property damage to their buses because of mirrors getting hit, and so there were some things that I know they were concerned with in the previous cross-section. So crashes, we've had folks that have been hit by mirrors on the sidewalk and killed. That was something that actually came out of the master plan with the project team. And so safety was a big issue, and that was echoed to us by the neighborhood association.
Right.
The other thing the neighborhood association also had asked us too was about the diverted traffic into the neighborhood. They were
Right.
concerned about that as well. And so it kind of getting ahead of the issue, Public Works funded and actually constructed an improved crosswalk in front of Dixieland Elementary on Ariana Street, which was the street within Dixieland that was going to receive most of the diverted traffic. And that was done well ahead of the test. And so the neighborhood association has been very instrumental in helping us along the way here.
Thank you.
Commissioner Music.
Chuck, where you have the story map and there's some access that they can go and get some of the data and things like that, the people, does it show the renderings and some of the other things that are on there to give?
It does.
Okay, good.
In fact, you're able to actually, the way they set it up, our GIS folks set it up, is you can actually slide it back and forth and see current.
Okay.
So they did a very, very good job of
Excellent,
putting that
okay.
together.
Okay, Stephen.
All right.
Thank you, Stephen.
All right. Afternoon again. In the interest of time, I'll try to move quickly here. Introductions complete. Purpose of presentation, simply to provide the commission and the public an update on the pilot study project and to provide a plan on the finalization of the study and next steps. The goals of this traffic study, what it will do and what it's not designed to do. The will-dos will also kind of serve as a quick agenda of what will be covered. First and foremost, effects on transportation safety within the limits of the project. Evaluate vehicular traffic and the impacts that it's had in the surrounding area. Evaluate changes in pedestrian and bicycle volumes. Review effects on transit services, first responder services. Continue to encourage the public dialogue as much as possible and provide decision makers with facts to make informed decisions. What it will not do, it will not dictate a final conclusion on the success or failure of the project, perfectly account for the effects of COVID-19, make decisions for the public or the commission, replace a public meeting to receive public comments, determine economic benefits or detriments from the pilot, or directly benefit any individual, people group, or business or organization. Just a quick reminder, Chuck covered briefly before, but the study limits are from Ariana Street to Lime Street, just over 1 mile long, and includes effects on 37, the local network, and local arterials. Just a quick catch-up. Chuck got us up to the construction of the pilot study. Public meeting was held before that construction. As a reminder, in March of 2019, we had over 150 participants at the RP Funding Center. Very good turnout. January 2020, the FDOT took before traffic count data before the test was installed. In April, the construction began and was completed in October 2020, I should say. January 2021, FDOT took the after count data after the project was installed, and we continue to collect data in partnership with City Lakeland Traffic Division.
I'm having a hard time finding, you're going pretty quick. I can't find this stuff on your sheet. Here.
I'll show you. I got confused, but it's above that. So go to the first page. It's there now. I think it
So
goes
we're going
here, then there.
on the
here,
bottom
then
up,
there.
all right. I'm trying to find this, not this is what he's saying.
Yeah, I must have.
If I'm out of order, I apologize. Cost, just a reminder, before traffic study was $70,000 approximately. The cost, the construction of the pilot that Chuck described before was $1.7 million. And the after traffic study and ongoing cost is $100,000. This is the typical section Chuck described before. Previously it was 8.5 and 9 foot lanes in its most constricted format. Now you see we've gone out and installed an 11-foot two-way center left turn lane and two 11-foot travel lanes. There's a 4-foot traffic separator, concrete, and then whatever's left behind that between there and the curb. The area behind the curve is not meant for pedestrians or bikes. So a quick scope, we did our traffic count collection. We did collect travel speeds on 37 and surrounding neighborhood streets. We collected vehicle travel time comparisons before and after along State Road 37 within the project limits. We did do a crash analysis. We checked with first responders for their response times. And starting with safety, Commissioner Walke, you were asking about this, I think, specifically, but
Yes, sir.
in the before analysis, 5-year period, there were 313 crashes on the corridor with 83 injuries. And in the after period, the very brief after period, it was only 5 months since the installation until March. We had 49 crashes along the corridor, no fatalities, and 15 injuries. The biggest takeaways highlighted in yellow there are that crash frequencies have declined after the lane elimination has been implemented. There were 15 crashes shortly after implementation in October of 2020, but those have progressively declined to 7 crashes as of February. We probably attribute that to drivers acclimating to the new conditions. And one thing we were very interested to see was the change in crash types, particularly from high fatality and injury causing crashes of angles and left turns to much more survivable rear ends. Another great point there is that incapacitating injuries decreased from 44 to 33%. So we are seeing a trend towards better safety on the corridor. 5 months of time, we would like to see more, but that's what we've been able to see up to this point. We'll continue to evaluate as time goes on. COVID-19 can't be ignored. Basically, what you need to know from this slide is that DOT collected data from existing traffic counters on State Road 37 and the adjacent arterials. And we found that from 19 to 20, there was a decrease of about 11% in the overall volume in the area, and that recovered in 2021 to about 3.8%. So is this the new normal? We're not sure. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question, but that's where we are today. These collection volumes did account for seasonal factors, and for school being in and out of session, we added correction factors to bring those numbers up. So that was accounted for. At the end of the day, we believe that COVID had approximately a 5 to 10% effect on traffic volumes within the traffic study area. Traffic data collection was extensive. We took 24-hour classification and city counts on 85 different locations within the area along 37 and in multiple streets in the local network. I won't go through every single one, but it was quite extensive, the amount of counts we had. We had great partnership from the City of Lakeland staff with their maintenance crews and things to ensure that those were maintained.
What's VPD, vehicles per day?
Vehicles per day, sorry. Collection, we collected the before and after counts in the same week of January in 2020 and 2021. That was so we could get it as close to an apples-to-apples comparison as we could. Obviously, the 21 January, things were just starting to open back up fully. But again, we corrected for those the best we could. Those dates were on weekdays when school was in. 72-hour volume counts were collected on 37 itself at those 4 sites. And after accounting for COVID-19 and the seasonal factors, we believe that based on all of this data and collection, that 5 to 10% of the previous drivers may be diverting away from State Route 37. 8-hour turning movement counts at the major intersections along State Road 37 at Ariana, Frank Lloyd Wright, Crescent, Lime, and Pine. What we found was the overall entering volume decreased at all intersections. Southbound right turns increased, I missed my percent there, at Lime Street. Colleen can probably help me with that. But that's likely due to the drop right turn lane southbound in that direction. Northbound left turns at Ariana remain the same, which was interesting because that's the southern gateway into the project. Turning movements confirm, along with the counts that we talked about on the previous slide, 5 to 10% of drivers may be diverting away. Heavy vehicles. This includes large trucks, delivery trucks, and transit vehicles. Heavy vehicle volumes overall increased at the intersections of Ariana, Frank Lloyd, and Pine. They decreased at Lime. Not sure really what this means. The overall volumes weren't big, so it's not anything to be too concerned, we don't think about, but there's no clear indication that large amounts of heavy vehicles are diverting onto local streets. Pedestrian and bicycle volumes, this is probably the thing that was most heavily affected by the pandemic. Obviously with the shutdowns and quarantines, many of the businesses were closed for quite a while, and they're still recovering from those effects. So impacts on pedestrian activity is really unclear. Overall, what we really saw was that obviously they did decline, but that's something that we will want to look at further as the economy begins to recover. Overall traffic data collection, we did collect speed data at all 89 count locations. Overall, we saw that some speeds increased in several locations, very minimal. We would consider that within a margin of error of 3 miles an hour. They did decrease at Hickory, Charles Street, and Patterson, in between Belvedere and Patton Heights. The key takeaway from this is that speeds on local streets showed little to no change. And I listed a few of those there that were streets of concern. At this point, as the pilot stands today, we would recommend to retain the existing 30-mile-an-hour speed limit on State Route 37. Vehicle travel times. This is probably what everybody wants to know, right? So, we work with the City of Lakeland Traffic Division to provide them and get data from their Bluetooth traffic cast sensors. We did extensive data collection with the help of Colleen and their staff to put together a graph that was actually created by the City of Lakeland, which I'll share next. There was a signal retiming in June of 2020 that you may have noticed that helped improve the operations through the area. Overall, what you can see, and we'll be able to look at on the next slide, which may need some explanation, is that northbound direction, approximately 36-second increase in travel time from Ariana to Lime. And from Lime to Ariana southbound, approximately 70 seconds increase in travel time. And I'll explain how they did that. So this is only for the peak hours from 4:45 to 5:45 p.m. And these are average times. So the average time to go through, there could be, some kind of special event. There could have been an emergency response that increased those times overall, but these are average times. The graph on the bottom with the yellow and gray, if you have those printed out in color, reflects the limits of the study itself. The upper portion is from Bartow Road to Edgewood with the blue and the orange. And you can kind of see the events marked out there. Angelo actually had his staff put this together. But you can see where school was out. We had the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020. There was a huge dip in the average travel times. Then we had the construction and the corresponding increase. We had the signal retiming in June of 20, and it dipped down slightly. And then we had the school restarts in the fall of last year where things started to return to normal. So you can see in general from Lime to Ariana, the gray, we're now at about 3 minutes and 29 seconds to go through the entire limits. We started at 2 minutes and 15 seconds when the study began. And then the opposite direction, started at 2:30 from area to Lime, and now we're at 3 minutes to go through the corridor. That's the busiest slide. We can come back to it if you like, but
It doesn't, I can't see it.
as best I could there. Transit services, we worked with Citrus Connection to provide an alternate shuttle route for their new Peach line. You can see the route here, which traverses some of the local street network, provides some service for their customers. Overall, their comments, Citrus Connection's comments have been that they're averaging 1,197 patrons a month on the new Peach line. They're very impressed with the turnout on that, and they've actually requested that FDOT provide supplemental funding to continue that service. You can see some of the correlations between the before and after there of the services. And then the Peach line, they later went on to say, has not detracted from the Gold line, which is the main line that services 37. They have not seen a significant drop-off in passengers. Emergency response times was provided by Polk County Fire Rescue. In the time period from October 18 to February 21, overall the response times decreased after the lane repurposing was open, but they were already trending downwards before that, which is probably a salute to their service. But as far as we can tell, there's no indications that there's been an adverse effect on their response times, at least within the corridor. But we have been told that some services may be taking alternate routes to go around the study area. So, summary of preliminary findings. Estimated COVID-19 reduced volumes by approximately 10%. Overall volumes on 37 have decreased, possibly a 5 to 10% driver diversion. Pedestrian bicycle activity decreased, but the true effects of that are still as yet unknown. There's no clear indication that any trucks are diverting away from 37 en masse on the local streets. Average travel speeds stayed relatively the same on 37 on local streets. We discussed the travel times within the study limits, and the crash types. The severe crashes decreased, and our incapacitating injuries have decreased as well. Next steps, which is probably what we're all wondering. We're going to continue to collect data from Citrus Connection. We'll want to do a deeper dive on the detailed data, the effects on US 98 and Hardin Boulevard. If there was traffic diverted, we want to have a good idea of where it's going to and how those arterials have been affected, if they have. We're going to continue to take public comments and any other further data collection that's recommended by the Commission or the public. Our goals moving forward, fall 2021, is to conduct a second public meeting to take public comment. October 1st will mark the installation of the one-year test period. So that will be our promise kept to the public to have a one-year test period and receive their feedback. Late 2021, we'll present a final finding to the Commission and the public with a goal in early to mid of 2022 to request a vote from the City Commission in favor or not in favor of the project, and a request of DOT to follow through with the applicable next steps if required. So finish up with a quick safety message. Start and end with safety. Before we conclude today's presentation, we'd like to take a minute to share a safety message. FDOT shares the National Traffic Safety Vision towards zero deaths and has a statewide plan focused on eliminating fatalities and reducing serious injuries on all public roads. Florida's Lane Departure and Intersection Coalition, Impaired Driving Coalition, Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Coalition, Occupant Protection Coalition, Motorcycle Safety Coalition, Safe Mobility for Life Coalition, Teen Safe Driving Coalition, Distracted Driving Coalition, Work Zone Safety Coalition, and Traffic Records Coordination Committee. Would like to take this opportunity to remind everyone, please drive safely and obey all traffic laws. And with that, we'd be glad to take any questions or comments.
So questions, Commissioner Walker and then Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you could help me out, sir, when you shared with us about the delay as far as EMS vehicles are concerned.
Yes.
Could you share with me again, because was it a significant reduction? I'm looking at those numbers and I thought the things were on the graph. Yeah, I see it, okay. Well, was there a significant decrease? I know you said response times decreased after lane repurposing opened, but we're already trending downward. So how am I guess deciphering that is, with the road die the way it is now, are we seeing a significant decrease as far as EMS services concerned through that corridor?
I would say, I wouldn't draw the conclusion that the road diet has decreased in emergency response times. I wouldn't say that particularly, but I would say that the initial data says that it has not increased them. I would say, right.
And my second question, Commissioner, what was the percentage again on the traffic data collection as far as the southbound right turn at Lime Street?
I looked it up, it was about a 20% reduction for the
20%.
southbound right turn movement.
So it did not increase, it decreased, it says increase here.
It decreased.
So it decreased, southbound right turn
At Lime Street.
at Lime Street decreased. So folk heading south, making right on line to get around the diet, as we call it.
Yeah, so to give you the exact numbers, in the AM peak hour, it decreased from 52 vehicles an hour to 41 vehicles an hour. In the PM, it did go up by 5 vehicles. It was 25 and it went up to 30. So,
Sorry about that.
Interesting.
Cleared up?
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Mayor. Stephen, do we, on the vehicle travel times where you talked about the afternoon peak hours, do we have AM peak travel times as well?
We could certainly get those, but we didn't generate a graph. We can have them provided.
I would like to see that. I think that would be important because in the mornings you'll have school traffic that you may not capture that late, 4:45 in the afternoon. So I would just be curious what that morning picture looks like.
Sure. We'll take a look at
Good
that.
idea. Other comments, questions? Yeah, I just, apologize, I'm trying to digest a lot of numbers here. But the one that jumps out to me probably the most, I mean, obviously we've got, it's slower, right? And there's some traffic that's diverting that we're trying to figure out where it's diverting, but the dollar figure in cost savings to accidents and things of that nature is just, it's phenomenal. So that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around. I mean, I have received plenty of people that have, sent emails, messages, met me and told me how they love it, hate it, or whatever. I appreciate all this information because at the end of the day, the zero is what we're looking for, right? So the accidents going down and then the cost of that. So this is certainly, I'm glad as I look at this and I see the timeline, I'm glad that the timeline is stretched so that we can obviously have time to gather more data and digest.
And that's actually something too that may be helpful. I mean, one of the complaints that I know we've heard as staff, probably as much as anything, is that the test is being conducted during COVID times.
Yeah.
I mean, the shutdowns literally began 2 weeks before construction began on the project. So maybe an option, and this is something that Stephen and I have talked about, is perhaps extending the test period 6 months to allow data collection to occur on just Florida Avenue during the peak season, the next peak season of 2022, to better capture volumes during probably a more normal winter season when spring training and, because I think that's going to be one of the, when it comes to decision time by the commission, I think one of the comments you may hear from the public is that the volumes are atypical of what you would find in the corridor. If we waited a little bit of additional time, I think that we would have more solid data from which to base a decision. And so I just kind of throw that out there for discussion and consideration.
Plus, there was some conversation about left turn signalization. You want to mention that?
And, I mean, we've received comments, some of the typical comments we've received, involve the need for pedestrian crossings in the corridor, the difficulty of actually pulling onto Florida Avenue from the side streets, and the need for perhaps some separate left turn phases. At Frank Lloyd Wright, I think, was one that particularly popped up. And so that would give us, I think, some time to take a look at that as well. And I know the department's evaluated, or in the process of evaluating, a lot of those comments. And so that additional time would certainly help on that front as well.
Well, going back to Commissioner Music's comments on the fact that it's longer, one of the things we want to recognize too is we're looking at this during the peak hours, because during the day, when it's not peak hours, it's probably even faster because the timing sequence of the city. Yes, sir.
So, as we're talking about extending the study, potentially doing that and collecting more data, if we don't do that, if we just say, okay, we've got all the data and then we follow this timeline here, if we look at the early to mid of 2022, we are expecting the barriers that are up there now are staying up until that time, correct? I mean, so whether or not we're collecting data, the road, the way it sits, is going to be that way until a decision is made in 2022. So that it makes sense to continue, obviously, other than the economic impact of it, but to collect more data is nothing but beneficial.
It is.
Right, it doesn't change any of the costs.
Correct, yeah.
Obviously, we wouldn't probably extend to 93 different locations around the network. I think you probably pretty comfortably say that the local neighborhood network has had minimal impacts, and that was the reason we did the extent of the number of counting locations we have. And we can provide you a list of those that are in the traffic study as well. It's pretty extensive, but we can probably easily go back and continue to collect data on the state road system.
I think anecdotally, you would say the local neighbors that anticipated a big load shift to go off, that didn't happen, and that not only does the data support that, but their own experience does as they look out, because we had neighborhoods that were interested in closing ends of their streets and doing something a lot more dramatic that are pretty content with the traffic that occurs. Commissioner Walker.
And that was my, I guess, picking back on what you said, Mr. Mayor, that's my question even now, because even though we heard from the neighborhood association, specifically Dixieland, prior to this study, as we did, what the neighborhood association is saying now, Chuck? Are we getting? We get, I know, different emails from different people that some may live in the neighborhood association area, some that do not. And what are we hearing from that association group? Or have you?
I know personally, I haven't heard anything from Dixieland Neighborhood Association as the association. I think there are some individual members or residents that have had concerns about traffic on Missouri, New York, those streets. Angela and I did have a discussion with the South Lake Morton Neighborhood Association probably 3 or 4 months ago. They were concerned about, and I think there was more perception of additional traffic into the neighborhood. My takeaway from the conversation was with the data that was shown and was drafted at the time was that we were able to show that the volumes did substantially increase, the speeds didn't substantially increase, and the vehicle types didn't substantially change during the test period. I think we answered all of their questions. Certainly we want to continue to have the dialogue with South Lake Morton, Dixieland, and the other neighborhoods. The area south of South Lake Morton, High Britton, Maxwell, Belvedere, the streets to the south along the lake, I think there is still a concern about cut-through traffic going down to Lake Hollingsworth.
Yeah.
One of the issues with COVID is that we've seen more utilization of Lake Hollingsworth as a public facility. So how much of the traffic is tied to Florida Avenue, or how much of it is just people trying to get to the lake because of, and Public Works has had to install no parking signs along there. So, I mean, there's definitely an additional traffic because of people wanting to get out and walk and bike during this time. So there's some things we need to look at there. But the intent is to continue and to actually kind of step up and have more engagement with the neighborhoods, to share the data with them and to see if there's something else that we're missing.
Commissioner McCarthy.
I'm glad you brought up the Polk Theater, because that's what I remember, is that the original discussion about this was to alleviate the hazards that were there when there was an event at the Polk Theater. People would park at Wells Fargo and then cross right there at mid-block, and how unsafe that is. So I'm glad that you addressed that in that process. Is there a timeline on that?
I think that's something that could be factored in ultimately into the commission's decision, because one of the things, kind of how it could be set up in terms of decision, is whether or not to proceed with a road diet on any of the corridor, the entire corridor, or to look specifically at downtown. Because as you start moving north on Florida Avenue, what we've seen is the volumes drop. So if it works in Dixieland, it will work in downtown. It's kind of the thing. And that's why when the funding got tight in terms of the test, the northern terminus was at Lime Street. But I think that would be part of the conversation is, it's really not an all or nothing.
Right.
And if the road diet is not ultimately selected, something still needs to happen on Florida Avenue as well. So those are conversations too, of what do we do with the sidewalks, the intersections, everything else. So there's a lot more that's gonna have to happen.
Well, even during our budget discussions, we were talking about connectivity to the Lake Wire neighborhood and how everything is segmented by major highways, and that our neighborhoods, especially in Northwest, are not connected to one another because of George Jenkins or 98 or Memorial, and it's not safe to pass to be a pedestrian or a bicyclist. I think it impacts the whole area of connecting our neighbors to neighbors and people to goods and services around Lakeland. So it's really imperative to the conversation. The other thing I just want to say is to Commissioner Walker's point, thank you for going back, both of you, on the historic overview that Dixieland and the city who propagated this, who talked about it first. Because I don't know that I was clear on that. As far as a commissioner coming in 2019, the historical view is from the Dixieland Neighborhood Association and the people in that area. For me, it was never really clarified, so I really appreciate the historical overview significantly, because we do get hammered that it was, either a commission and that it was us, and I didn't vote on that. I wasn't here yet. So, but I like hearing that it was sort of a groundswell of public opinion.
And something from a connectivity standpoint, and this gets back to timing of Florida Avenue itself, is that we've got several other key, what we call complete street projects that are in the pipeline on the state highway system in central Lakeland that are moving forward. Lakeland Hills Boulevard right now is scheduled to be reconstructed from Parkview to Granada in around 2024. That's obviously going to be a very substantial project because of impacts around Tigertown and the hospital. And
Is that considered failing? So when we look at like Dixieland and that part of the thoroughfare, and it's a failing road because it doesn't conform to state standards. So the other failing would be toward Tigertown, and then also like George Jenkins, I would assume, is also failing because it is so narrow.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's a combination of not having a turn lane, not having pedestrian crossings, and so things that just don't fit today's design standards for complete streets. But what we want to do is make sure we don't have a major improvement on Florida Avenue that overlaps with Lakeland Hills. And then looking at even a little bit longer, Memorial Boulevard is will be studied to go from 6 lanes to 4 lanes from from Florida back to the overpass. So that's probably an 8 to 10 year range, because Memorial's got to get rebuilt anyway, because the concrete and everything else is going to reach the end of its life. And so we've got 2024 Lakeland Hills, a gap, Memorial Boulevard, which is going to happen anyway. It's just what do we want the Memorial to look like. So we're going to have to thread a needle, and so that's going to be one of the things too that we want to just kind of hone in on is that the good news is there's a lot of improvements that are coming.
Yeah.
The bad news is there's a lot of construction that's coming, and we want to make sure it's all staggered properly.
Yeah.
Yes, so Commissioner Reed.
Oh, I thought you were.
No.
Okay. Go ahead. Thank you. I grew up on Belvedere Street, Dixieland area, and seen a lot of changes. I worked at Dick's Hardware. If you knew Carl Dick, right across from Reed's Cliff Restaurant, Bressler's Ice Creams. Bressler's grocery store on the corner area, and now the Walgreens is. And we go that way frequently. I will attest that traffic has reduced 5 to 10%, I think more, because I think people are just avoiding the area. But they're telling me they just don't go there.
Good.
And, it was interesting to know that some of our streets don't meet the ADA code because of the sidewalks and stuff like that. And I didn't know if Florida was that dangerous per se to be a pedestrian. I can still that in Miami, but I'm not sure about it.
And Orlando.
Yeah, well, and Memorial Boulevard, I lived up that way now, so that's bad also. And of course, the calls that I get are mostly negative. My friends live in that area still, and we've got speed bumps on almost every road going down to Lake Hollingsworth now, which does impede, there's traffic, but there's still a lot of traffic. We have, when Phil and I were on the first committee when we first adopted this, and I was kind of opposed to it then. And so we went to Edgewater Drive over to Orlando, and of course the big push was going to be the economic driver, how this is going to create more business, how it's going to make this a walking destination versus a riding destination. And subsequently, I don't know why DOT didn't make the hard call and have Florida Avenue go north and Missouri and New York come south, which they do in Arcadia, Wauchula, over Lake Alfred. I still think that's the best route to go. You can get rid of about 20 houses, and you're going to have all the traffic you can do. You're going to take down about 20 houses. That's about it. And it's not going to be, it's not your commercial sector you're going to take down, and you're going to improve all that neighborhood from a property value. Because I will tell you, we have more vacancies on South Florida. Property values are going down because people and their businesses are going down. I don't know if it's COVID or what, but there's an economic driver which is declining right now, and I don't want to impede our traffic going to downtown to Lakeland. People will find a way, but I think if we don't have that main corridor, I don't want downtown to die. Because we are having a lot of dramatic growth in the perimeters to avoid Florida Avenue. And just again, that's all I would like. I think there's a lot of negative components to it, and I would rather see one way this way and one way that way. And it's going to be less cost, I think, and you can beautify both streets, and you have a lot more economic driver in between, and maybe on the outskirts. So if there's already some commercial on the west side of New York, and I don't think it would cost very much, and some of those houses may be torn down for parking areas, but there's not enough parking in that general area anyway. That's the hard call. Nobody's going to like to hear it, but if it's a thing to make it right, I think that's what, I don't know if y'all done a study on that. I know you've done a study on taking all the property on Florida Avenue, which is going to be, there's not enough money in the state of Florida to probably do that, but.
And that was actually something that was one of the alternatives that was looked at as part of the 2016 master plan from DOT. And that was where the public opposition from the folks, particularly in the Dixieland neighborhood, there was a lot of concerns about bringing that much through traffic in. Because that's I think been one of the issues that one-way pairs, it's the right road, right place. And in places where one-way pairs have been installed in a very urban environment, you start to see them get removed because it's just becomes dangerous, and it's getting the right road in the right place. And that was a concern I know that the stakeholders had back in 2016.
And I will tell you, if you don't go to a light, you're going to see it on Florida Avenue trying to go left or right, particularly if you're going east and trying to take left, forget it. If you're going to go right, turn off your car and get ready because you're going to wait there a while.
Commissioner Music.
Yeah, I was just wondering a little bit on that, the practical aspect of the design now, which I know is the future design. My sister lives on Palmalla, just a couple of houses down, and man, if she goes at the wrong time and tries to turn right or left, it is miserable. I mean, she just, because the cars back up from the light there, and that's a tough thing for those that are coming, up, heading west and need to go either north or south. So, and I'm sure that's a bigger picture thing, but I know that's for the individuals as I go and talk to them, and this is my sibling, it's a tough exit.
Well, that particularly, because that's where everybody's
Really
merged, and you
pushes
also
in.
have some people who are still not merging well that she's exposed to.
And that's been a big issue that we've definitely have heard, is that very issue,
Yeah.
getting on off of Florida Avenue.
The most difficult thing that I do in this whole corridor is getting onto Florida Avenue, especially if you have to do a left turn across lanes. You know, you just have to wait. Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you. Chuck, in our concerns from businesses, is that a common complaint about customers not being able to get out or into their parking lots and stores? And
I think that's part of their concerns. I know we heard early on a concern from 7-Eleven about a decrease in business in terms of receipts at the store there at Crescent. Once we heard that concern, we kind of asked, Florida Southern where they were in terms of their on-campus student population, and they were still down relative to their previous year's enrollment because of COVID. So, again, this is one of those where I'm not sure if there are other factors that are impacting business receipts. If the college isn't at 100%, back on campus yet, is that affecting nearby businesses? So those are things that maybe additional time gives us the ability to look at those other variables.
Because it will be this fall.
yeah. No, I think that's, to Commissioner Reed's point, if we are talking about from an economic development standpoint, we want to make sure that this works for businesses and people being able to get in and out of parking lots and that it's friendly to customers. So I think at this point, it's a little unclear what that impact is like.
And I would add to that even the curb cuts themselves create confusion optically
Yeah.
for drivers.
Right. Where do I go?
Which wouldn't
Where do
be
you
that
go?
way, when it all gets worked out. And so, and probably the majority of the I don't know to be a fact, but I would think it's possible that some of the rear-end collisions are people that actually, in the green light era, are slowing down to let somebody in to be nice, that they see turning in behind them, they didn't realize they were just stacking up traffic. And and so that possibility exists, which you don't have that happen once you work through some of this. Yes.
My question is kind of twofold, and it has to do with another subject that has to do with traffic as well, but this and something else, so I'll let my distance to go before me.
Okay, Commissioner Madden.
So I kind of have thought about this whole thing, as like kind of two parallel efforts. And, bringing the history and folks who've lived here, forever, thinking of it as the only north-south thoroughfare. And then seeing the context of, creating the other arteries to be able to have the, Bartow Road and the Hardin and then getting the Wabash. I don't know if the sensors and the study is properly getting the data of diversion at that north and south peak for those folks who are just, one of the things that on CRA we said in Edgewater, it's instead of being a passerby, just a passing through road going north-south from getting off I-4 and going to Mulberry, being a destination and being a neighborhood and, trying to bring it back to that, with the Complete Streets initiative that FDOT is doing. So in my mind, I feel like we're collecting all this data prematurely in the neighborhood when phase one is to divert folks who don't have any intention of landing in the neighborhood. They're just using it as a thoroughfare. So to me, it's divert those folks, let them have another north-south access, and then assess the effect on the neighborhood, getting out onto South Florida. But to me, I thought you have to realistically see how many you can divert. How many of those north-south, south-north travelers can you get off the road? And then it's the neighbors, and it's the folks who live there and want to shop there, and how can we best approach that as a city and as policymakers with predictability, a predictable parking landing spot that makes sense, predictable transit landing spot. So we're moving from the car-centric highway north to south to now it's a destination, it's a neighborhood. If I want to shop like I was in Nashville, 12th South, how do you get to 12th South? It's Dixieland, frankly, and you got to know where to park, and then you land, and then you walk. So I've been, anxious to get to that, so now where do we park and get to work? Because we can't have another born and bred, be nationally recognized and then not feel like we're making a safe spot for them to land in our Dixieland corridor. They trusted that we're working on this as their leaders and making it safer, and they've had lines of folks and been nationally recognized, and they're looking for another spot because it's not suitable. And then you see do or die, show up and the kombucha and murals. But how are we as policymakers and leaders, not just what they're doing behind the scene, traffic and FDOT, making sure, first of all, our citizens feel like they can get out of their road and get, to where they need to go, because that's who we're prioritizing. And secondly, our visitors who want to go to the retail establishments and to our businesses have that predictability and certainty that they know where to go, how they can park, and then they can walk around safely. So in my mind, as we go forward, as a marketing person, I need to see, this is add to the history of creating these arteries, diverting these north-south travelers, and then revitalizing the neighborhood and bringing back some of that charm and that history and beauty for those folks who live here. It can't all be just about traffic and cars and frustration and, impediments to, or no one would ever think you should vote yes for this. I think it's seeing the pictures. Like Mike said, are the pictures on there? Because we need the pictures. We need, if you're renovating your kitchen, you started with the picture. So you can live through not having a kitchen for 6 to 9 months. And so I think that's going to be really important for us to be able to say. And so my first question was, do we feel like we have data to support? We have diverted not just folks into the neighboring streets off of South Florida, the neighbors, but that we've diverted north-south travelers who have no intention of landing in the neighborhood. That's number one. And then second, is this a phased approach? Is it first get them off the road and then provide our citizens and our neighbors some certainty and predictability on where they can park so that they can walk now safely because of this effort?
I mean, I'll just say, in my mind, and it's even, jumping from DOT's perspective, but it is definitely a multifaceted approach here that for economic development to really hit the full potential in Dixieland, it all begins and ends with Florida Avenue. I mean, it is the corridor in that district. And so we've got to figure out the game plan on, okay, what are we going to do to make it a more compatible roadway for the surrounding businesses. And, I don't think we've had as many of these projects nationwide to be able to look at the data, but like with mass transit, if you're talking a bus rapid transit line, you're not going to get the same level of private investment as you would with a light rail or some other type of hard rail infrastructure within that right-of-way. So I think that's what we're looking at here is until a decision is made on the permanent solution for Florida Avenue, I think folks are going to be maybe somewhat hesitant to spend the big money to make that big investment.
But to transit point, I think I Uber, even in Lakeland with not, we have lots of kids who needs our car or whatever, and so even if we know that there's a predictable Uber spot in Dixieland, so I'm reticent to think we have to wait on a countywide transit system to solve this, predictability and parking point to getting.
But I think it is phased. In other words, first the decision is, do you preserve the corridor? Then do you establish the safer pedestrian paths, the leveled sidewalks? Then do you invest in that kind of entrance and the buildings that will go in there? And all of that slows traffic down, by the way, as you go, because that's the intent, is that you're going through and then you'll have places that you pull behind, and as we develop those properties, there'll be parking in the rear of those kinds of things. But it is phased. It doesn't happen.
I think the most traction I've received from constituents who are frustrated and upset and hate it is to give them that we are not trying to make your life miserable. We are trying to do this for you, the folks who live here and shop here. But I have to point them back to the diverting the folks north-south who are, to get them off onto Hardin, and then the Hardin folks onto Wabash as that, develops. So that they realize really the point is to revitalize this neighborhood for you, make it easier. But we can't get there until we start to divert some of this north-south traffic.
And that appears to only be 5 to 10% at the present time, right?
Correct. And it's the beauty of the Bluetooth sensors and the DOT traffic counting stations is we have that data retroactive. So we can go back as we continue the analysis to see, what the traffic was before, what it's going to be now, and what the full impacts are. So as we continue to review that, we'll have a clearer and clearer picture of how much diversion is actually happening.
Commissioner Reed.
Thank you. Stephanie made some interesting points, and I think everybody's added quite a bit. Of course, there again, I think Dixieland just doesn't have enough parking. That's the biggest component is Dixieland does not have the parking. And even though it's, I think the real estate's going down, it's still some of the highest priced real estate we have in Lakeland until we get, and the properties are not deep enough. If somebody comes and buys one, they're going to have to infringe on the residential components to the east or the west to get the desired parking they want. You got to go past the alley, in my estimation. And so until we have parking, and if we do this, I think you're going to find Dixieland die.
Yes.
I want to make just one correction because I gave you the wrong volume. I was actually looking at Pine Street and not Lime Street. So I just wanted you to have the right information.
That would make more sense.
Yeah, I was thinking.
Yeah,
I was
so
sitting
the
there, I thought,
southbound, in the mornings, the southbound right turn went from 29 vehicles an hour to 49. So it's about a 70% increase.
Increase, okay.
And then in the afternoon, it went from 67 to 102.
Wow,
Wow,
wow.
But Pine will take you over to.
yeah, fine.
Commissioner McCarley?
Just to your point, Commissioner Reed, I think, behind Dixieland Mall, actually, there's quite a bit of parking and beyond those alleyways too. But another thing with this too is if we're going to, I don't know that we can build our way out of traffic issues. I just drove back yesterday from South Carolina, through South Carolina, Georgia on I-95, through Jacksonville, and we can't build our way out of all the people coming south and moving to Florida. Like, we just can't. There's no way in the world we can build our way out of it with a road. So this, going back to the Citrus Connection volume that they've seen on those circulators that they use on either side of South Florida, the ridership has gone it's gone up on those circulators. So people are utilizing that, so they aren't necessarily using their own cars. So you're talking about a complete behavioral shift of getting people to understand that it's a walkable, safe community. You're not playing Frogger, and trying to get killed going to subs and such from the Dixieland Mall, which my office used to be in the Dixieland Mall on the second floor, and we would hear crashes regularly with the mirrors hitting people and every week, and it was treacherous to try and cross the street, even at the stoplight at Patterson in South Florida, to go to the post office or to go across to the Schwinn shop and then walk down to subs and such. I mean, it was crazy. So I think that it's a behavioral shift that we're looking at as well. If we can tell the story, which DOT and then Chuck's office obviously does well, of what this could look like and how you can access it, millennials and other younger generations are going to continue to use public transit a little bit more, whether it's Uber or Lyft or something like that. Or if we get Mrs. Madden's scooters that she wants, we can have them riding scooters or golf carts from our neighborhood, to Dixieland. I think it has to be a complete, we cannot do what we've always done. We just can't physically do what we've always done by getting in our cars and driving places. It's sort of like wanting to pull up to the front of the store you're going to walk in. Those days are over because big box, we see our Lakeland Square Mall has gone by the wayside and other areas are going by the wayside. Strip malls are okay, but you can't, if you look at how we're growing as a state and as a region, we're going to have to shift our behavior to either public transit, ride sharing, scooters, walking, or biking somewhere safely. And that's kind of the idea, I think, when we talk about utilizing Dixieland and having it look like Edgewater in Orlando. That's the College Park neighborhood. And so you can walk to Publix there safely and go get your groceries and get home. And it's better for the environment, it's better for your health, it's better for a lot of things. So I think that's kind of what we're struggling with, is how do you get everyone on board and understand that, there are a lot of other things than sitting in your car on South Florida in the middle of the afternoon, or, even going north in the mornings or whatever it is. We have to shift the way we think about how we live in an area, and how we traverse it.
Agreed. Commissioner Walker?
It's a good segue, my dear sister.
Oh, we have segues.
There you go. Another
What year is it?
Because, it's interesting enough, I think about, and I've said this with my sitting commissioners now, and I might have said it with you yet, my brother, but since you're here for the first time. But it's interesting how we can leave and go to the places and adapt easy. to what you gotta do there. I mean, the entire time I was in Key West, I didn't use a car. I either, Ubered, or I scootered, or I walked. That's what we did. Or when I went to Charleston, that's what I did. Or when I went to Seattle, Washington, that's what I did. And I think you're right, it's a mindset. We got to continue to work on the mindset of how, things are changing and evolving. Because even when we had the big concern some years back, and it's not as much as we have now, people want to know, well, there's nowhere to park downtown. And I'm thinking, well, all these places I see down here in the south of what we call our core, south of Maine, there's parking. And I will park intentionally on, Mass, near the Chamber building, and count the spaces and think, wow, look at all the parking spaces we got. Don't like to walk. You want everything to be instant, right in front of the store we want to go to, boom, get in, get out, whatever. Anyway, that's a good thing. But my question is this. We're talking about this particular element, of course, and it's important. But as you mentioned, we have other areas. We got Lakeland Hills we've got to move to. Kathleen Road is becoming a serious situation. I don't know how many people, are in that area. Early morning, late afternoon, and of course, hopefully, with what's happening, coming, taking the Kathleen Road exit, getting off I-4 to Kathleen to take, of course, Fairbanks to get to our new first phase of the north-south corridor we're going with Wabash. But, I hear neighbors telling me they're trying to get across the street to get to a store. They're trying to get across the street, and it's just not, it's traffic. So something going to happen in that area sometime in the near future, I'm sure, with things coming about with DOT and our traffic person, guru, Mr. Barnby, because it's becoming horrendous there along that corridor, especially between I-4, well, it's going a little south, a little north, because especially where LRMC is planning on landing its new facility. That point south, all the way down to what we call Bonnet Springs Park area, it's traffic.
And
Constant.
I'm glad you bring that up, because that's also, DOT conducted the Lakeland Area Alternatives Analysis for us a couple of years ago, and as part of that, the Commission adopted a laundry list of projects for each corridor, including Kathleen Road, and so we do have standing funding requests for pedestrian crosswalks between 9th Street and 10th Street on Kathleen. We also have requests for analyses of a roundabout at Fairbanks and Kathleen. So some other things to really help calm, because you're right, that with everything that's happening to the north, out into the county, going all the way past Duff Road, Kathleen Road is carrying a lot more traffic than it did 5 years ago. And so there's a lot that needs to happen there, and so we want to keep that on the radar as well.
It's definitely on DOT's radar, and we've been working on the traffic division to look at safety improvements on Hardin Boulevard, specifically in that area.
Yeah, as it goes along. All of this has to be, guys, though, in economic restabilization, all the benefits that can come from increased values as businesses occupy those buildings, and the increased walkability of people to go to stores and amenities that they haven't been enjoying in a dead area. And we get teased at some of the things that we are seeing go in place there now, but without those businesses having the certainty in mind of being able to continue to grow safely in those areas. And so it'll come as we make a decision later in the spring, or be it early summer. I like the delay idea. I think it's a great idea for lots of reasons, even the Delta variant reason, because we may have to buy a little time there. And it doesn't cost us anything additionally to extend the test.
No surprise, how, going back to what Commissioner Reed was talking about, with businesses, more than doubled. I'm thinking, wow, we have more businesses to come into the
Well, I was
corridor.
hopeful that meant they felt like we were making it safer for
Yeah,
them.
I'm
They
glad
would
to see
invest.
that.
Right,
Glad
right.
to see it. Glad to see it happening.
But it's still, the sidewalks won't be occupied like they will be occupied. And I ride my bike a lot, and I go down through that area, and it's a hard area still to ride through and feel very safe. Right. And so, but we won't have all those curbs, and it looks a little curious for people who don't haven't been through that area to say, what is this all about? Because they don't understand why they're there and why they have the cuts for the water drainage and all that kind of thing. And it can be beautiful as well as safer, as well as ADA.
Safety is number one.
Commissioner McLeod, did you have something else?
Good.
All right. I thought maybe I had missed you again. Anything else for you, Commissioner Walker?
Oh, no.
I just can't help looking at the CRA over there. I mean, Elise is sitting there and with his mask on, so I can't breathe his face. But honestly, every time I see a new mural, I'm like, oh, thank God, because, no disrespect to the actual concrete barriers that create the test, but seeing some color and adding some joy
it helps out.
and seeing, do or die and the kombucha open. I mean, you're like, okay, it's like you're in the middle of a remodel and you want to pull your hair out and all you know is what you're going without and how frustrated you are. And you have to see those little glimmers of hope and you have to see the vision of what it could be. So thank you to you and your team, for helping be strategic. Probably knowing that people are feeling cranky and that they need a little, something to lift their spirits. So thank you so much for the efforts the CRA is doing.
While we're at it, do you have any input you'd like to offer?
I do. I know. I heard Commissioner Reed just talking about the economic impact. And, I wouldn't say that Dixieland is necessarily dead or dying. I think it's just stagnant in that way. And so when you think about property values, they've been pretty flat the last couple of years. Once we see, we'll get to see the impacts of the road diet in the subsequent evaluation of the properties where we may be able to see some increases there. But when you think about the investment from the private sector, the new businesses coming in, they believe, right? The people believe, the property owners believe, they think Dixieland is next, and they feel comfortable in making the investment because there's actually space to do so. They didn't use those front doors on Florida Avenue, and so now you start to see renovations to those facades, and we're helping them invest in those areas. So where they didn't feel comfortable before, now they do, and we're just kind of slowly getting them out. So the new businesses, the doubling of those new businesses, and then also on the CRA side, I would say our grant participation has increased tenfold because we were averaging 3 to 4 a year in Dixieland, and now, we've got 20, we'll probably end up closer to 25 or 26 grant administrations at the end of this year. So, there's a heavy investment, and it's not just our dollars or the public dollars. So those business owners and property owners, they do feel comfortable in putting money out there.
I have a son who lives in College Park in Orlando, and so we frequently walk down to Edgewater to do the restaurants and talk to some of those owners, and they say how transformational that was for them because it was so difficult. And you feel safe walking. You feel safe at the crosswalks, and yet you're still on a state road. So it's worked very, very well in that arena. Other comments?
More to come.
All right. Anything else you want to show us? Any other data presentation? Thank you very much for your time and preparation. Anything you want to close with? Sir?
End up with next workshop, sure.
All right.